There's no doubt that the Mazda Miata is an awesome car. Perfect weight balance between the two front axles, a super slick manual transmission, a steering feel that's arguably more like an extension of your own body, and it's at an attainable price for the common folk. This is a true gem of the sports car world. But I didn't always see it that way. I'll explain why. What is going on, people? Mark from Double Clutch Auto Reviews here. Thank you again for tuning in for another review video. Today I'm here with my own personal 1990 Mazda Miata MX-5, also known as the NA Miata. I'm going to show you all the ins and outs all around my Miata, talk about a few key points, give you my 2 cents if it's worth anything, and we'll take it for a spin. Let's dive right into the exterior styling. You know, of course, that I've already heard 1,000 times from these macho manly guys that I drive a hairdresser's car. Sure, you could argue that it's definitely not aggressive. It's definitely more on the cute side of a vehicle. But if you know what this is, you really don't care. People that say those things about a Miata, how it's girly or lame, probably have never driven one before. That's usually the first thing I counter with. Secondly, I go into how I think it actually looks like a baby first-gen Viper. And then as soon as you throw up the pop-up headlights, it literally turns into the happiest car ever made. With the headlights up, the only thing I can think the Miata is saying is, hey, look at me, take me out for a drive, let's go have some fun. Moving on to the interior of the Miata. My favorite part about it is that there's not much to it. Everything is manual, everything is analog, nothing's going to activate unless you initiate it. I don't even have cruise control in this car. There's really not much to break. Of course, on a 32-year-old car, things will break. However, most things are pretty mechanically simple, and that's not something that you see in cars anymore. Starting with the doors, you open them with a little handle. You kind of just have to stick your finger in and pull the handle. Simple enough. Close the door, lock it with the latch. And now to lock the doors when you exit the vehicle, you have to unlock the latch, of course, open the door. Then you either have to close the door and then lock it with your key, or you have to leave the door open, lock the latch from the inside, hold the door handle in the open position, and then close the door while you have it in that open position, and then let go. That'll leave the door locked. If you just open the door, lock the latch from the inside, and close the door, it will unlock itself automatically. This is a wonderful feature that hopefully prevents you from locking your keys in your car by accident. If you've seen my first video ever on my YouTube channel, the 2019 Suzuki Jimny I did in Costa Rica, you will remember that I did not know that, and boy did I get a lot of flack for it. So I've learned my lesson, and now I know better. Moving on to the steering wheel, I do have a 1990 with an airbag, and the horn buttons are these little switches right to the side for your thumbs, and they kind of fit perfectly if you have your hands right at 9 and 3, and all you do is live a little, and that's the sound that a Miata makes with its horn. Now moving on to the turn signal and windshield wiper stalks. These actually feel quite solid compared to what you would expect from a 32-year-old Miata. The actual stock going into the steering column is actually made out of metal, not plastic. So arguably these feel better than some modern cars these days, especially ones that are completely cheap plastic. Next we'll look down next to the ignition switch at the cigarette lighter. Now I have it as my eject button, but you can clearly see with the positioning of the cigarette lighter how they made this car. You can tell what their priorities were when building it back in 1989. Ask me if you see a cigarette lighter that close to the driver's hand at all times on a modern car. You don't. The gauge cluster is pretty simple. We have our tach, speedo, odometer, tripometer, fuel gauge, oil pressure, and coolant temp. You don't get more than that, and frankly, you don't really need it anymore. Moving down the center stack, or the tombstone as they call it, we have our hazard switch up top, and below that, our pop-up headlight button. Easily the best button in the NA Miata, of course. Moving down, we have our climate controls, a simple knob, and 3 dials. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then I have my radio with a cassette player and a little storage compartment below. And now looking down at my gear lever, I have an actual wood shift knob. It looks and feels great. In the center console, you see this part is missing. I just use it for storage, but this is actually where my ashtray would go if I had it in. Now looking at the storage compartment in the center console, first off, there's this nice little padding that I have for your elbow when you're resting it, and you have to open it from the driver's side. There's no latch on the passenger side. It actually folds this way. You open it up, little storage compartment. I can keep a few items in here: sunglasses, garage door opener, hand sanitizer, business cards, you know, the usual. Now you also see you have your fuel door release. Just give that a pull and it pops right open. Other than these 3 small spots I just showed you, the only other storage compartment I have in this interior is the glove box. Holds a decent amount of items, not too bad. That is, unless of course you want to put the top up and you can store items on this rear deck lid right here. I have actually seen a lot of people doing that, surprisingly, but it works. And of course, as you can see, we have manually adjustable mirrors that you have to move like that, and of course, manual crank windows. I will say though, they go up and down very easily and quickly. For this kind of a car, exactly what I would want anyway. I also have this abysmal excuse for a cup holder in the passenger footwell right here. I don't think that this came with the car. I think it's aftermarket. It kind of works, but I've already had drinks fall out of it because it twists and turns. I don't necessarily trust it at all. I don't even really use it. I mean, in a pinch, if you're going just down the road to get a Slurpee or something. However, I would definitely not put a drink in there and take any corner at any slightly above average speed. Another neat little fun fact is that there's actually speakers in the headrest. That's pretty cool. You don't see that every day. And now I'll show you how the convertible top works. First, you just move the sun visors down, just get them out of the way. Next, you have two latches, one on each side. You push firmly on both of these unlock tabs and you pull all the way back on these latches. Now you can do one of two things. You can either just take the top and throw it back like this, which is a little reckless. Still works perfectly fine if you're in a rush, but I'll show you what I like to do just to make sure I don't have any issues with the top in the future. I get out of the car, I give it a little karate chop right in the middle. That's to make sure that it folds evenly and doesn't crease anywhere it's not supposed to. And I gently fold the top back. Then I just push these lashes down so they're not sticking straight up. And ta-da, you're good. And to put the top back up, you simply do the same process in reverse. And now really quickly, I just want to show you the fuel cap. What I find cool about it is that it doesn't have an evap system. It didn't need it back in 1989. So if you notice, I go to open the fuel cap and I read the label, it says, warning, remove slowly. That's because when it's hot and it builds up pressure, it actually goes psst, and it releases all that pressure. That doesn't happen in a modern car. And now moving on to the trunk of the Miata. Mine you actually have to open with the key. So simple enough. Put the key in, turn it, pops right open. You can see there's a decent amount of storage space for what you'd expect out of this car. Holds a couple of bags or two, not too bad. There's also the small spare tire back there where I keep a set of tools and a spare rag and whatnot. And if you look to the right, that's where the battery's located. I'm sure they designed it like that to help with weight distribution. To close it, you could either go from the top down, but I don't like to get my fingerprints in the car as best as I could. So I just hold this little pin right here, slam it down. Now before we go out for a spin, let's talk about the Miata's power plant. It is not known to make a lot of horsepower at all, obviously. However, it is certainly known to be extremely reliable, as well as a great balance of power for this specific chassis. This is the very well known in the Miata community, the 1.6 liter naturally aspirated inline 4-cylinder engine, making 116 horsepower and 100 pound-feet of torque. And that's mated to a 5-speed manual transmission to my open differential and rear-wheel drive. Fuel economy is rated for 22 in the city, 28 on the highway, and 24 miles per gallon average overall. However, I have been getting in the mid to high 20s average miles per gallon with driving it very spiritedly, so I think the EPA underestimated those numbers just a little bit at least. As far as what I've done since I've owned this car, I have cleaned it up from top to bottom, every nook and cranny that I could get to. I've also waxed it several times. That includes my torque detailing ceramic spray video. I'll link that in the description as well. I've also replaced the turn signal light assemblies. I've replaced the brakes. I've also painted my wheels and my diffuser. I've also done oil changes, the coolant flush, yada yada yada, air filter replacement, all that good stuff. Couple of zip ties here and there too, just to make things work. Nothing too janky though. And other than that, this Miata has not needed anything else. I've been very lucky. It has been absolutely solid, especially for a 32-year-old car. 33 rather. In the grand scheme of things, it is not common for 30-plus-year-old vehicles to be reliable at all, let alone as reliable as this car has been. So kudos to Mazda for making such a good car that long ago. In regards to how I felt when I first bought the Miata, I know that some of you die-hard fans will want to smite and shame me for it, call me an imbecile, and I totally get your point. But when I first bought this car, I actually wasn't all giddy over it. I actually debated selling it, flipping it for a profit actually, right after I bought it. And I'm really glad that I've changed my mind since then, because I actually started to drive the car a lot more, really experience it, especially in tight corners, and that's where I truly got to experience how awesome this car was. At this point in time, I've realized my reasons for not liking the car were just plain dumb. One of the reasons was I was scared it was going to break down on me catastrophically. Sure, that's not an unreasonable fear, especially for a 33-plus-year-old car, but this MX-5 has done nothing but just prove me wrong. I drove it over 550 miles on the KancCruise event. I'll also link that video in the description as well. And this car didn't give me any hiccups or complaints at all. It did not skip a beat. And I was beating on this car. I mean, we were romping on all of our cars up and down Hurricane Mountain Road, and this car just took it, did what I asked it to do, and asked for more. Another reason that I was debating selling the Miata at first, and it is still an undeniable fact, is that this car sucks on the highway, especially going over 65, 70 miles an hour. Between the wind, road, and engine noise, the fact that I have somewhat of a shake in the steering going over 75 miles an hour, it is definitely not an Autobahn cruiser. It's debatable that you need earplugs if you have the top down as well. With only 5 gears, you're constantly spinning at 4,000 RPMs just to keep up with normal traffic. And then if you're unlucky enough to hit a pothole, it may just send you straight to the chiropractor's office. What's the verdict about that? I say get over it. It's not what the car was made for. It is a 3-decade-old, 116 horsepower Japanese roadster. The catch to this car is how it shines so brightly due to its size and its weight. Only 2,116 pounds. It also has nearly perfect 50-50 weight distribution between the two axles. I will throw up some more specifications and dimensions of the Miata on the screen right here. Pause the video if you'd like to take a look at those. But once I started really driving this car, especially on some of the great twisty back roads that we have around here, if you go looking for them anyway, I realized that this car doesn't need a zillion horsepower to be an absolutely fantastic driver's car. Between the engagement and the balance, the Miata is arguably one of the most fun and one of the most rewarding driver's cars ever made. The transmission is so good, you can just bang down the gears, rev match so easily, everything's mechanical so it just feels so right, send it into a corner and rev it all the way out, it oversteers just enough, but the way this car was designed from the factory, you're not going to be putting yourself in a completely reckless situation unless you really go for it. If you truly enjoy the act of driving, you will be satisfied and thoroughly entertained whether you're a beginner enthusiast, an intermediate like me, or even a seasoned veteran professional driver. I already thoroughly loved driving cars before I bought this Miata, but after I really got to know the Miata and knew why it was so good, it has made me love driving that much more. That's how good the Miata is at what it was made for. Safety in the Miata is sometimes a concern of mine. I frequently ride motorcycles though, so I don't think I have a right to complain about the safety of this car. But I do think about my rollover protection sometimes, or lack thereof. Yet I'm sure you'd argue that's on me since I don't have a proper roll bar installed in my Miata yet, and you're definitely right. A high quality roll bar properly installed is arguably the single best mod you can do for the sake of your squash. Pun intended. And as I said before, the transmission is just so good. Between the wonderfully mechanical feel of the shifter, as well as downshifting and rev matching being very easy to figure out even for a beginner, yet still so incredibly satisfying. I think this car makes you feel like you are a better driver than you actually are. At least that's how I felt and why I've grown to love this car since I've owned it. And I think it's actually made me a better driver overall too. Being able to understand what a true analog car should feel like and how it responds to your inputs and the road. It's truly one of the best manual transmissions I've ever felt, even compared to new cars, honestly. For a younger enthusiast that's just learning how to drive a manual transmission for the first time and learning how a rear-wheel drive car responds, all the way up to a seasoned veteran that can righteously squeeze every last bit of performance out of this car, the Miata can put a smile on anyone's face. Even 32 years later, in its completely stock and original form, pretty much like my Miata, it is still one of the best chassis you can get for the money if you want a truly spectacular driver's car. And because of that, it is the #1 selling roadster in history, ever. That's a fact. Albeit, we all know that this platform is just begging to be modified. For my personal taste, a track-focused setup that increased power, handling, and braking would of course make it that much more of an incredible car. I do have ideas of how I'm going to modify this car in the future. Consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see those videos later down the road. I really appreciate it. But as of right now, I'm just keeping it original. However, one must keep in mind though that undoable modifications will potentially hurt this car's value as a collector's car in the long run. Don't sweat that though unless you have a completely original, super low mile, basically garage queen Miata that's just been hibernating for the past 3 decades. Chances are though, you're like me and you definitely don't have one of those Miatas. In that case, I wouldn't worry about it, but please, whatever you do, don't ruin the drivability of this car. That's what this car was meant to do. Drive. Unfortunately, far too many of these little guys have fallen victim to rust, camber, or footprints on the hood for the Instaclout. So many of these have been clapped out or parted out. The prices of clean, untouched ones have absolutely skyrocketed lately. People know how good this platform is, and a clean slate is quite valuable these days. It's already a super fun car. However, modified, it has that much more potential to be even way more fun. Whether you plan to keep it OG or mod it to high heaven, whatever you plan to do with your Miata, as long as you have the appropriate financial situation, the Miata will handle it exceptionally. You just can't get cars like this anymore. Simple, connected, analog, pure. The Miata has an amazing way of connecting you mechanically to the car and to the road. Fewer and fewer of these older vehicles are surviving, and they're becoming more and more precious of time capsules by the day. This car is technically already an antique, and I do firmly believe that well-preserved examples like this NA Miata, for instance, will be a true relic and a reminder of how cars once were. If you are in the market for one of these, happy hunting, good luck, and be wise with your hard-earned cheddar. If you score a gem like I did, I can promise you, you will not be disappointed. Take care, guys. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.